Hello and welcome to a deck profile for Premium. This time we're going to be talking about Crest Luard, which is a deck that I think is a little underrated. There's a lot of pros to this deck, and I think there's a lot of room for exploration in this archetype. I'm personally not the biggest expert on Shadow Paladins in Premium, so I know that my list is incomplete and will likely be a work in progress, but I've got it to a place now where I feel pretty good about it, and I think this is a solid deck to play, definitely at your locals, and I think it might have potential to break into the more competitive scene if the right tech is found, perhaps, or just if the right pilot has it, because this deck is somewhat difficult to play. The main strengths of this deck is that it has excellent late game scaling from the Crest that we're borrowing from the standard Luard deck. It also has access to scaling in other ways because some of the strides care about having a high ritual count, which is the number of grade 1s in your drop zone. And that lets you get a really potent late game board state. We also have access to Guard Restrict, restanding Vanguards in the G zone, recyclable Perfect Guards. We actually have, I think, the best recyclable Perfect Guard in the game in Premium. And we have a lot of hard search effects to find our pieces. So this is balanced out by the fact that this deck struggles against early rush. It doesn't really get its defensive engine going until the late game when we can recycle those perfect guards, as I mentioned, and it doesn't plus a lot of cards to hand like some decks do. So it can struggle surviving into the late game to get to that powerful end board. Without any further ado, let's talk about the actual list, and we'll start with the starter, Drag Prince Root. You must play this one because the Crest maker specifies that you get the Crest when you ride over a Drag Prince Root, and the other version of this card is not very good. Next up, we have our primary Grade 3. This is 3 copies of Dragheart Luard, and to go with it, 1 copy of Drag Driver. Dragheart Luard has the effect that you can retire 2 Grade 1 rearguards and draw a card and retire 1 of your opponent's rearguards. And then as an axe skill, it has a pseudo ritual ability where the cost is discounted by Counterblast 1 for every Grade 1 in the drop. You can Counterblast 3, retire 2 normal units, and or return 2 normal units from your drop zone to your deck, search your deck for a Drag Driver Luard and ride it standing, and then shuffle your deck. And at the end of this turn, you ride the Luard from your soul. So this is a really good Grade 3. In fact, this was a meta-defining Grade 3 in the V format. Here in Premium, it's just okay because it's competing with the History Collection strides. We generally are going to make 3 force markers off of this little micro combo where we're going 1, 2, and then ride this from soul to end to get 3. So we're on par with the number of force markers they're making, but we're not on par with the amount of cards they draw. And then let's talk about the Drag Driver Luard. We're only playing 1 copy because we don't want to stay on V Luard any longer than that, and we have ways to get this back into the deck. This effect on its own can recycle this easily. What this card does is when it's placed, you Counterblast 1, you search your deck for a number of cards equal to the number of Luards in your soul plus 1. They have to be Grade 1s, and you call them to R and shuffle your deck. And then during your turn, this gets 5k for each Grade 1 rearguard, and if you have 2 or more Grade 3 cards in the soul, the original crit of all your Grade 1 rearguards becomes 2. We're almost never going to get that effect because we're not playing the card from V that puts a Grade 1 from drop into soul to combo with Eldona to get a Grade 3 into soul early, and we're not going to ride into this again in the late game. If you do want to play an additional copy of Drag Driver to ride into in the late game, you can consider Chain Rancor as a stride because then you'll get the heart card effect of this, and that would give you access to crit on all your rearguards plus Guard Restrict. However, with our current game plan, this Luard clashes because right now my game plan is to go Force 2 with this deck, and Force 2 and this both change the original crit to 2, which means that they don't stack together. They both, like the Force changes their original crit to 2, and then this changes the original crit to 2, and you're just at 2 crit. But this is a nice way to search for any pieces that we need, to plus cards, because one of our search targets can draw cards, and we can build those force markers really quickly, and because we are building 2 force markers on turn 3 right away, we can sometimes cheese the opponent out. Like if we swing with a rearguard and then we hit a stand trigger on the Vanguard swing and swing again, that can be a lot of damage that they have to think about taking. This is going to force them into uncomfortable guard scenarios where They have to decide whether they want to take 2 damage or guard this and deny themselves counterblast. And then next up, we have 2 copies of Dragfall Luard. This is a supplementary ride target. We want to go into this after we've done this little combo on turn 3, because this card gives us free stride. It has Ritual X. You can pay Counterblast 4, choose a normal unit from the drop and put it on the bottom of the deck, and then instead of paying the cost for stride and ultimate stride. And then the cost of this is reduced by 1 CB for every grade 1 card in the drop zone. So usually this is going to be free, which makes our strides free, which means we don't have to play as high a density of grade 3s as other decks do, which is very nice. And then it has the effect that when you stride, you can counterblast 1 and search your deck for a grade 1 or lower card, call it to R, shuffle the deck, and if you call the ritual card, then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as that unit and retire it. So we get a little bit of board control. We can take out a problematic unit in play that's disrupting our game plan. But more often than not, we're going to be finding sources of countercharge or grade 1s that plus cards in order to have enough cards to set up our Ritual 10 for our Morphesus Stride. It's not super critical to ride into this Luard because at the end of the day, we don't need the effect. It's just nice to have. It's a bigger priority to find this Luard and ride into this. Next up, we have 2 copies of Origin Mage Eldona. This was a staple in the V version of this deck, and here it's still pretty good. It has the effect that if you're on grade 1, you can ditch it from hand and reveal the top 10 cards of the deck. And if you reveal 2 or more grade 1 cards, you choose a grade 2 or greater card from among them and put it into your hand and shuffle the deck. So this can help us find our ride targets. It can help us find Luards, which is very important. And also, on top of all that, it has a really good rearguard skill, where when it attacks, you can counterblast 1 and retire 2 other rearguards and draw 2 cards. We generally don't care about sacrificing our own units. A lot of them are low quality on the board, and we were mostly interested in them for their powerful effects. And we want grade 1s in the drop zone anyways to fuel Ritual. And we don't get the additional power because we're never going to ride this as our Vanguard. If we've ridden the Crest, we can only ride Luards. And then, notably, it counts as a grade 1 in the deck or in the drop zone. So it fuels our Ritual effects, and it can be searched for anything that searches a grade 1. Next up is our grade 2s. We don't want to play too many of these because, again, we want to cram as many grade 1s into this deck as possible. But here is our V promo ride fixture, Mage of Fameblades Kushgrade. What this does is when it attacks while boosted, you can counterblast 1 and search your deck for a grade 1 and call it, and then shuffle the deck. And then at the beginning of your ride phase, if your Vanguard's grade 1 or less, you can discard this, check the top 5, and add a grade 2 or less card from among them to your hand and shuffle. So this helps us find our ride targets. It helps us find our Crest Maker, which is really important. If you combine these with aggressive mulligans, you can really consistently get the Crest. Though our deck is worse at it than other decks because we play such a high grade 1 count, the odds of us being able to G-assist for a 1 are lower. But we also don't need the Crest as much in this deck. It's really good to have, obviously, and it makes the deck much stronger, but it's not an essential part of our game plan. Next up is 3 copies of Dragfencer Dagda. This is a multi-attack grade 2. When it attacks, if you have Ritual 5 and you're a GB1, you can counterblast 1, choose one of your grade 1 or less rearguards and retire it, and then you can search for 2 grade 1 cards and call them to R. You have to be on a Luard Vanguard, but we're always going to be on Luard because remember that strides gained the name of the heart card when you stride over them. So this is just an easy way to get an extra attack. We can countercharge a lot in this deck, so the counterblast cost isn't too bad. And if we hit a stand trigger, this isn't a once per turn, so we can stand this unit and attack again and get another superior call from the deck. When we're in the late game, we're going to have a ton of power from the force mark, or not from the force markers, but from the Crest. So literally any grade 1 in the deck will be a viable attacker. Next up is our little search package. We have 3 copies of Skull Witch and Mane. This has the effect that you can rest it and search your deck for any 5k power card and call it to R and then shuffle the deck. But it's a hard once per turn effect. You can't activate subsequent copies later. And this gives us a lot of deck thinning. It helps us build a board for having the units to pay for all these costs where we have to retire our own units. And it has a nice little package of utility cards we can find. Namely, we can find a copy of Abyssal Owl, which can draw a card for Counterblast or Soul Blast if we're on the same grade as the opponent. Or Dump Hood Dragon, which can Soul Blast 1 and retire itself to find a Blaster Dark, which is a nice little grade 2 ride target. So this lets us cheat on the number of grade 2s we're playing. We are only playing 9 grade 2s, which isn't very much, and we're guaranteed to always be able to find a Blaster Dark if we found a domain, except when we accidentally draw the Dump Hood. So you need to mulligan this back into the deck anytime you see it. That gives us a little bit of security for our write-up. Nemain is a 5K, so she can find herself, so you can always generally have something. If you have one domain in play, you have 4 targets in the deck to find. There are other 5K cards you can consider searching for, but these are the good ones that I'm playing right now. There's a grade 0 Forerunner starter that countercharges, and there's some other utility effects. But because we're playing the Crest, we don't have as much room for a utility package as we normally would. And that's one of the drawbacks of playing the Crest over playing a normal version of Luard. And then let's talk about Blaster Dark a little bit. When it's placed, you can counterblast 1, and your opponent chooses one of their rearguards and retires it. And then if they have no rearguards, you can discard a card to give this card Twin Drive. Twin Drive on turn 2 is pretty powerful. It's going to throw off the opponent's math when they're trying to guard early, because most people would try to drop a 50k to guard your Vanguard swing and make a 2 to pass, but we can actually hit a 2 to pass, so they'll probably no guard it, which means that any crits we hit will go through. And even if they do guard it, then we put any triggers we find on the other rear guard, and then now they have to guard that too. So it's a nice little, it's probably the best grade 2 we could ride into in general. And being able to hard search for it with Dump Hood and Domain is really powerful. Next up, we have our grade 1s. We have 4 copies of Draggers with Knees. This is the card that makes the Crest. And the Crest will give us 5k power for every face-up card in the G-Zone, which is a really strong late-game scaling mechanic. These also draw a card when you ride them, so you get a nice little extra card to go with it. Which helps make up for the fact that we can't play as much card draw utility cards that we could search for with Nemain. And then next up we have some utility grade 1s. We have 2 copies of Charon. This is a counter charger when it's superior called for Soul Blast 1, which is nice. And then Abyssal Owl, which on place checks the top 7 for a Luard, adds it to hand, and discards a card if you did. And then at Ritual 3, if you sacrifice this for the effect or cost of a card of Luard's name, you countercharge 1. And then 1 copy of Light Elemental Homily. These have been errated, so now they have the effect that you can, I don't remember if it's bind or remove, but you remove them, and you get the Homily effect on your opponent's next turn. And the effect is that rearguards can't attack in the 5th or more battle unless they pay Counterblast, which is really strong at stopping multi-attack. And if you are playing a Homily, you can strategically damage deny the opponent so that they can't pay for this, and that will cap them at 4 attacks. Though notably, Vanguards aren't affected by Homily, so if they swing Vanguard last, they can still get a 5th attack. And if they have a restanding Vanguard, they can still get a decent number of attacks even through this, so that's something you have to keep in mind. Homily is very matchup dependent. Decks that have access to easy countercharge can also sometimes fight through a Homily. So there's a lot of things you need to consider with this card, but we can hard search this because our grade 3 Luard that rides into Drag Driver will then find 2 grade 1s. So we can always get a Homily on turn 3 in matchups where it matters. It is unfortunately 6k power, so we can't search for it with the main. And this card is so powerful when it is good in the matchup that if the format changes to one where Excel clans are really popular and degenerate multi-attack decks are really good, we can consider playing additional copies of Homily so that we can potentially search one with our grade 3 turn and then draw an additional one later to shut off multiple turns from the opponent, which will help us survive into our late game scaling. So this incidentally gives us a reasonable matchup against multi-attack decks, and that's really nice to have. Next up is our perfect cards, and we're playing 4 copies of Dragsaber Ezros. These have the typical perfect card effect of discard a card and your unit can't be hit, and then they have a really good recycling effect of GB1 Ritual 3, which means 3 grade 1s in the drop. Choose one of your rearguards and retire it, and choose another copy of this card, put it on the bottom of the deck, and then add this card to your hand. So anytime you have 2 PGs in the drop, you can get one of them back and put one in the deck, and that's really, really powerful. If we have all 4 PGs in the drop, we can get 2 back right away. And then we can potentially draw those PGs after shuffling our deck somehow, which means we can get a lot of perfect guards over the course of a game, especially factoring in that one of our G Guardians is also a perfect guard. So we have a lot of ways to block really big numbers. And that's one of the strengths of this deck. This synergy is so good, and the fact that we need even numbers of perfect cards in the drop to do this means that we don't play an Elementaria, even though I think Elementaria is the best perfect card ever printed. And then next up we have our triggers. starting with 3 copies of the grade 3 heal and 1 copy of the countercharge soul charge heal. You can honestly play more of this heal. This heal's probably better. I would seriously consider playing a 2-2 split. I just currently only have 1 copy of this. This card is the typical grade 3 anti-aggro heal. You can, when you guard with it and you haven't ridden grade 3 yet, you can either give your Vanguard 10k or you can give the attacker -2 crit. So you can survive early pressure. And then this heal, when you G-Guardian with it, you bind another heal from drop and itself, and you either countercharge or soul charge. And this deck needs a lot of countercharge, and we have a lot of uses for counterblast, so we really want to countercharge as much as possible, which is why I'm considering adding a 2nd copy of this card. And then next up we have our crits. 4 copies of Taboo Mage Kafar. This is the draw crit from History Collection. We can't get the full effect because we aren't Claret Sword Dragon, but that's fine. We just want this for the fact that it draws a card on defense and is a crit on offense. And then next up, we have 3 of the Stride crit, Knight of Evil Spear Gillinger. This is just a way to pay for Stride, and it has good numbers. But we don't need to play 4 copies of this because our Drag Fall Luard will make Stride free. And then we have 1 copy of Belial Owl. This is a crit trigger that puts itself to the bottom of the deck if we're on GB1 and Ritual 3 and we have a Luard Vanguard. So it's a crit that keeps putting itself back to make sure our trigger density is good. And then when it's retired from R, due to the effect or cost of a card, if we have a Vanguard with Luard in its name, we draw a card. So we can use this to plus a few more cards off of our self-retire effects, and we can use this to break the symmetry of one of our strides, which I'll get to later. And then next up, we have 3 copies of Cursed Eye Raven. This is a really good stand trigger. This has the effect that you can rest it, put it back on the deck, and shuffle, and you look at the top 2, and you can call up to 2 cards as rested, and then you shuffle the rest back into the deck. Or you put them on the bottom of the deck, sorry. This is really good because we have a lot of self-retire costs, and so being able to just turn 1 card into 2 cards so that we have 2 units to retire is really strong. And the fact that it's a stand trigger that puts itself back into the deck means we're more likely to drive check it and stand our Dagdas to get extra attacks. And then we have 1 copy of the Red OT. This card is really good with Guard Restrict and extra crit. The blue OT isn't going to make as big an impact as it normally would because we already have extra crit on all of our units from our Stride and from Force 2. So generally speaking, everything will already be lethal. So the blue OT isn't going to give us any additional kill pressure aside from just being 100 million. And picking up a card from the drop isn't going to be as good because our perfect cards already recycle themselves, and we already have ways to recycle the grade 1s in our drop zone back into the deck if we need to, and we want them in deck rather than in our hand a lot of times. The light OT is okay if the opponent is not perfect guarding. You can retire all the guardians with it and make an attack hit, so that can sometimes kill the opponent if they 2 to pass or 3 to pass to the Vanguard. And drawing the cards from it would be really nice, so that's a consideration. You can play that one instead, but it doesn't give you any additional kill pressure unless your opponent hard guarded something instead of perfect guarding. The black OT lets you pick a card up from your damage zone, which can be nice, but it's not a significantly better multi-attack than this, because this will give something that's standing the 100 million, and then that will get 200 million swings, whereas that card will get a 10 plus 10k swing and then plus 100 million swing, so it's less kill pressure. And the Keter OT is not very good. We're playing a lot of grade 1s, and that means we're not going to get twin drive off of any of our attackers with it, and there's always the chance, of course, that the Keter OT decks you out in close games, so I don't like playing it. So I think the red OT is the best one for this spot. Next, let's get to the G-Zone. We have 3 copies of Drag Principal Morfessa. This is our primary stride. We're going to go into this every turn that we can for the most part. What it does is, as an axe skill, counterblast 1, turn a card from the G-Zone face up, and retire 2 rear guards, and you can draw 2 cards, and until end of turn, trigger units count as grade 1s for a ritual. And then, as a continuous skill, if we're at Ritual 10 grade 1s and drop, all of your units in the front row will get plus 15,000 and plus 1 crit. And when the opponent would call cards from hand to G, they must call 2 or more at the same time. So this is going to really strip cards in the opponent's hand, because when combined with Force 2, our front row will have 3 crit, which means that, generally speaking, everything will be a lethal swing. So the opponent will have to guard everything to not die, and they'll have to spend at least 2 cards to do so. And the additional power will help us hit good numbers even on our first stride, And then in the late game, we'll help our Crest power scale slightly faster, and we'll close the game out sooner. Not much to say. It's really good. The fact that we can turn triggers into grade 1s is also really strong, because that means we can aggressively put grade 1s back into the deck with our recycling effects. And next up, we have one copy of Drag Driver Luard from the standard deck. This is the effect that if you're at Ritual 3, when it attacks, you can counterblast 1, flip a card from the G zone, and then search your deck for a unit card with the ritual ability, call it to R, and shuffle the deck. So this can find Dagda, which is really good, which can then extend your attacks even more. It can just find any good ritual card if you need something. And it's a way to get multi-attack in the G zone, which is nice, but it doesn't gain any additional power or guard restrict. So there's really only two cases we're going into this. One is that we can't get Morfessa active for whatever reason, and the other is that we've used all our Morfessas, or we're in a scenario where we have so much scaling from the Crest that we don't actually care about the guard restrict or the additional power, and we just want as many attacks as possible. Next up, we have two copies of Drag Abyss Luard. This has the act skill Soul Blast 1, choose a face down card of the same name and flip it. Choose one of your rear guards and retire it. Search your deck for up to 2 grade 1 cards and call them to R and shuffle the deck. And if you call 2 units with ritual, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. A little bit of board control, which is nice. And then at GB3, Ritual X, all of your front row units get +10 for every 4 grade 1s in the drop zone. So this is a really good late game scaling card. It hits very big numbers. If we have 12 grade 1s in the drop, you're talking +30 to the front row, plus whatever you have from the Crest. And since you're at least GB3 for this, you're probably getting anywhere from 15 to 20 power from your Crest, which makes your numbers basically unguardable. Your opponent will have to perfect guard everything or have a lot of G Guardians to survive. And so that makes this a nice thing to go into alongside Morfessa for a different route to victory. Next up is Dark Knight Crow Kuruk. This is the effect of retire 2 rear guards. Your opponent chooses 3 of their rear guards and retires them. And if they did not retire 3 cards, this unit gets, as a red tech skill, at the end of battle it attacked, counterblast 1, retire 2 rear guards, stand this unit, and get 10k. Or it gets 10k not as part of the red text effect, so it actually will just have the 10k on the first swing. So this is a restanding Vanguard. This gives us a way to get extra drive checks, because this does not subtract the drive, so we're getting triple drive twice. We can retire useless units whose effects we've already used. We can wipe the opponent's board with this if they have any problematic units in play, and if they don't have any units in play, we can just guaranteed get this effect off. So the ideal scenario is the opponent has 2 units, and we get to kill both of them and get the restand. Next up is Drag Anger Ogma. This has the act skill Ritual 5, counterblast 1, soul blast 1, choose a face down card from your G zone, turn it face up, choose up to 5 of your grade 1 rear guards and retire them, and for each rear guard retired by this effect, your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand and puts it into the drop zone. And then if a total of 3 or more rear guards are put into the drop zone by both fighters with this effect, you draw a card. So you're going to kill 5 of your own units and make your opponent discard 5 cards if they have an empty board, which is really strong, and sometimes we'll just kill them outright because they won't have anything to guard this attack. And on top of that, we have, again, lots of ways to break the symmetry of that. We have grade 1s that add a grade 1 to the board so that we got 2 cards for the price of 1. We have grade 1s that draw a card. We have grade 1s we don't care about. We have grade 1s that countercharge, and ones that countercharge when they die specifically. So we are getting benefits from that while our opponent is just losing cards. So this works out in our favor slightly. And then next up is our G Guardians, and I'll lay them all out because G Guardians are a package and must be considered together. And then, of course, one copy of Harmonics Messiah that is proxied because I have too many premium decks for the number of Messiahs I own. So, starting off with our best G Guardian, we have Dark Dragon Deep Griever Dragon. This is the effect that when you guard with it, you choose up to 5 grade 1s from your drop and put them on the bottom of the deck. And then this unit gets 5k shield for each one. And if you put 5 cards, you can counterblast 1 and choose one of your units, and it can't be hit till end of battle. So, it's a perfect card for counterblast 1, and it's very easy to put 5 grade 1s back. But even if we don't want to do that, If we put 3 or 4 back, it still hits a very high shield value and often will guard the attack anyways. This is a great way to recycle all of our counterchargers, all of our grade 1s that we'd want to call to attack with, while we can leave the perfect guards in to get their own self-recycling effect. Really strong card. Next up is Dark Dragon, Plotmaker Dragon. This is just a vanilla 25k shield G-Guardian if we're at Ritual 3. Not much else to say. You go into this when you don't want to spend any resources and the attack isn't that big. Next is Dragwise Ironic. When this unit's placed on G, you reveal 5 cards on the top of the deck, and you call all the grade 1s to G and put the rest on the bottom of the deck in any order. So you go into this one when you don't have Ritual in the drop zone, and you just want to get as many grade 1s in your drop as you can this turn. A lot of grade 1s have 10k shield, so this will often guard for a very big number. And then lastly, we have Witch Queen of Iniquity, Gelido. GB1, turn a face down G-Guardian face up. When this unit's placed on G, you may pay the cost, and if you do, choose up to 2 of your grade 1 rear guards or less and move them to G. And if you move 2 cards, you draw a card. So this will help us get grade 1s that are in play into the drop zone where we want them, while also getting some extra shield and also drawing a card in the process. And because it flips a G-Guardian face up, it will build additional Crest power. But because it flips the G-Guardian face up, using this G-Guardian will reduce the number of G-Guardians you can use over the course of a long game. So keep that in mind. You generally will want to use this either as your last G-Guardian, or if you know some of your heals are out and you're not going to be able to use all of them on G-Guardians. So that's the G-Zone and the main deck. Let's get into some of the lines of play, like mulliganing. You're going to want to find a Luard, and I generally like to go first with this deck because our strides aren't reliant on building Generation Break to activate any of their effects. So it doesn't matter that we didn't get to stride on our first turn. And this Luard will build 3 force markers, putting it roughly on par with a history collection stride in terms of markers on board, but slightly behind in terms of power and cards drawn. But going first will also keep the opponent from being able to pressure us really hard at their history collection turn and then kill us on their second stride. If we go first, we set up our board, and then they have to go into their history collection stride to set up, and then we get to go into Morfessa and attack them and strip cards out of their hand with the guard restrict. So we're trying to find this card. We're obviously putting any copies of these back into the deck. We want to find V promos because they will help us search for the Crest Maker. This card will also help us find Luards or find grade 2s to ride if we don't have one. The Crest Maker is the most important card to find because it'll draw a card and it'll give us the crest for the late game. Any copies of Domains are also good to keep. And of course you can consider keeping perfect guards and heal triggers because those give you a lot of defense. Domain is probably the second most important card for this deck to find because it can set up our grade 2 line, ride line, and then it can also deck thin a lot to make our trigger count better and increase the odds of drawing anything else we need, as well as finding a card that draws a card. This card is really good for finding the Crest. Luard is essential to our game plan, and this is just a nice card to find Luard and find other stuff, and it's a good card to call as a rear guard because it can sack 2 things and draw 2 cards. You don't need this card though, so this could be really anything, depending on the matchup. As for attack patterns, we're generally trying to... So we did V-Luard shenanigans, and then we went into Dragfall Luard, and then we got our 3 force markers on turn 3 from riding the V-Luard and getting the Drag Driver combo. So our front row will have Crit. We will stride into Morfessa. We will activate Morfessa's effect to draw cards and turn our triggers into rituals, and then we're going to try to get a board of a Dagda on one side, and then probably we've used a Domains or so, and then literally any grade 1 on the other side. It doesn't matter because it's going to get a lot of power from Morfessa, plus 15. Plus we turn a card in the G-Zone face up, so at the very minimum, we will have access to 5k to the front row from that. So it'll be at minimum plus 20, and if we used any G-Guardians, it'll be even bigger. It'll be plus 25 and a crit. So all of these will have 3 crit if they hit, and if we've pushed the opponent up to 3, that means every attack is lethal, and if they're only at 2, the Vanguard is still threatening lethal if we drive check a crit. So we will swing, we can even swing boosted because Dagda will call 2 grade 1s. We can swing with the dagger, retire this, and then we can find 2 grade 1s. We can do something like finding this card, oh, not this card. We can find Ildona and a countercharger. And then this will give us another column while also giving us an option to draw cards of this if in the event that we don't hit a stand trigger and we don't have anything else to use it for. So then we can swing with the Vanguard and we drive check. If we hit any stand triggers, we get to stand Dagda and we get to do this again. We can sacrifice this grade 1 and then call to this unit in front of it after attacking with this. So we can get potentially another attacker, any 2 grade 1s in the deck at this point, and we can attack again. If we don't hit any stand triggers, then we can just swing like this, and we can sack whatever we have on the board over here, plus this card to draw 2 cards and hopefully set up to survive the opponent's next turn. And each of these attacks is going to eat minimum 2 cards out of the opponent's hand, and possibly more because the numbers are good. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 cards out of their hand potentially if they had to guard everything, which they would. This, of course, doesn't account for if they used any G Guardians or copies of Elementaria, because that's not calling from hand. So those cards won't count for Morphesa's effect, and so any G Guardians will just be a 1-card guard in all likelihood. But as you can see, this is a lot of pressure, and if the opponent guarded everything, we have left them with no additional damage, so they do not have any counterblast, hopefully. This means that their turn is not going to be very pressuring, and we drew a lot of cards over that turn, at minimum 5 from activating these 2 effects. That's also another note. You can call Ildona as the on the second swing with Dagda instead of the first one, so that you can then sacrifice the Dagda if you have to. But regardless, we're going to get a lot of cards. We have perfect guards that can recycle, so if any perfect guards from the drop, we can get those back. And then their opponent's going to attack us again, and we're going to put them in the exact same scenario again on the next turn. Your choices are take 3 damage or don't get any counterblast. And that choice gets harder and harder for the opponent as they run out of countercharge and run out of face-up damage to use. And on top of that, because we're keeping the opponent at 3 while they're playing the game normally, generally our heals will be active and theirs won't be, because we can push ourselves up to 4 or 5, and then any heals we drive check or any heals we hit in damage will heal us, but any heals they drive check will not be active. So we can control the damage zone pretty effectively. We can run the opponent out of resources, and the longer the game goes on, the more favored we get to win, as every time we go into a Morphesa, we are flipping a card from the G zone face up, and thus we are scaling the game even later. And eventually this goes from 5 to plus 15, and then it just keeps getting out of hand. So that's the deck. This deck has a lot of hard searching and a lot of counterblast costs, so you'll need to manage the counterchargers very effectively. So you'll always need to keep a clear head about which counterchargers are still left in the deck for you to search for. Paying a counterblast to search for a unit and then not being able to find a unit that countercharges might cost you the game in some scenarios, because you simply will have wasted a counterblast, and now sure you have enough units to play, but do you have enough counterblast to activate Morphesa, and do you have enough counterblast to activate Dagda? So you're going to have to keep that in mind anytime you're choosing whether to activate this search effect or any of the other search effects in the deck. You'll also have to weigh the odds of that when you are G-Guardianing, because do you really need this Perfect Guard effect? Or will using the counterblast here lock you out of applying meaningful pressure to the opponent? So that's the deck. As you can see, there's a lot of room for customizability. A lot of this list is flexible. The Ildonas are flexible. The Dagdas are technically flexible because there's other ways to get multi-attack, like this grade 2 that attacks when it boosts, if we're willing to sacrifice some power ceiling. These Dragfall Luards are optional. You could consider playing the G Luard in a split with the V Luard, because it has a very useful on-stride effect where it counterblasts and retires a unit and then searches for 2 cards, and then it also puts 2 cards back every turn, which can be very useful. And the type of counterchargers and the number of them you run is flexible. These cards are optional, the Dump Hood and the Blaster Dark, so those are also flex slots. There's a lot of room for customization. So if you like tinkering with your deck and building the best version that suits you the best, this is definitely a deck to consider playing. I think it's also very fun to play. It's a lot of intricate toolboxy stuff and a lot of managing multiple resources and managing your drop zone and the cards left in deck. And at times it feels almost like playing a Pokemon TCG deck. And on top of that, we get to play a cool Wizard Boy, and we get very oppressive late game scaling. So that's it for the video. I hope you found this interesting, and I hope that more people pay attention to Crest Luard, because I do think the deck has some potential. I don't know if I'll be the person to finally get this deck into the top tiers or the high tiers, but I hope somebody will.